Is political hate ever justified? Is it possible for someone to harm your life just by voting differently than you? And what if what if both political parties are really two sides of the same coin? In that case, what does political empowerment really mean? Today, I'm sharing what I call my political recovery journey. This is the story of how I went from being a very politically intolerant person to now being a person who loves people no matter their political beliefs, because I deepened my understanding of love. Welcome to the Truth Activist Podcast. I'm Lauren Geertsen, and this is where we dive into hidden history, secret agendas, and global awakening. And though we discuss some heavy topics, the focus always remains on empowerment and healing. Because with enough truth, we can heal everything. Let me take you back to a gray, drizzly Seattle day in 2017. This is right after Trump's inauguration, and I'm in a huge field with thousands and thousands of Seattleites. We are gathered there holding signs. We're wearing these pink pussy hats, they were called, pink crocheted hats with little ears that stood up, representing cat ears, but also a nod to Trump's infamous radio clip and horrible things he'd said about women's bodies. And we are gathered there, and then we start to flow through the downtown Seattle streets. And at the time, this is the largest single-day protest in U.S. history. Later drone footage will show overhead just this river of people blocking traffic for blocks and blocks. The amount of people was immense. There was such a feeling of camaraderie and community, and yes, rage and frustration and confusion that the bad orange man could have been elected. How could this happen? There was shock, but in the midst of that, there was a sense of safety at the community that was gathered and seeing each other's faces. It was a sense of, okay, we're in this together. And I'm there holding a sign. My sign says, "Empowered women are greater than Trump's power." I'm there with friends, and I have this sense that I am definitely on the right side of history. 100%. I am right, and the people who voted to put Trump in office are on the wrong side of history, and they didn't care enough about other people who weren't like them, or they didn't see the bigger picture, or they didn't listen to their neighbors. Like, it was so astounding to me that other people could have thought differently than me. I mean, it sounds so ironic saying it out loud, but sure enough, that's how I thought. And I just had this sense of, I am definitely right and they are definitely wrong. And I look back at that and I have to laugh at myself, because I should have expected that the still small voice within me would say, "Oh, really, Lauren? Are you sure that you are on the right side of history and they're not?" The good thing was that I had some preparation for the peeling back of my beliefs and the political divisions that I held in my head. And that was based on a pattern I had started to notice in my life, where every time I held a really intense belief that I was wrong, I was right, and other people were wrong, and that belief was charged with anger and frustration and righteousness, every single time I turned out to be in the wrong. So, just as one example, a pretty major example in my life, I grew up in a religious home, and I was told through many different avenues that I had the right religious beliefs and every other religion was wrong, and our religion alone had the right path to God and everybody else didn't. And so we were entitled to convince other people of our beliefs, and that would be, quote, saving them from their wrong beliefs. And I internalized a sense of arrogance and superiority from this. I truly believed I had the right religion and the right way to God. And even at, 18 years old, I knew more about God than somebody else who had lived their life but had different religious beliefs. Well, I turned 21, actually almost when I'm almost 22. I have a major spiritual awakening, sudden and unexpected, that totally shatters my concept of God. And I realized God is entirely different than what my religion had presented. And the good thing here was God turned out to be so much bigger, and love turned out to be so much bigger than what I was presented with as a child. It was a rough awakening because I had integrated so much of my identity into my religion. And like that sense of superiority and arrogance of I'm right and they're wrong, that becomes part of one's identity. That was part of my identity, and it can be quite uncomfortable to peel that back. And that certainly parallels the political healing journey. So, and if you do want to learn more about this experience, I also talk about this spiritual awakening in my book, The Scorpion and the Lion. And I would say that is one major example, like one cornerstone experience I had in my life that helped me realize the best thing I ever was wrong. It's uncomfortable to be wrong, but on the other side of being wrong, there's more love and more truth and more growth. And I looked back at my life and realized, yeah, I'd rather have the love and the growth and the truth at the cost to my ego and my identity. So fortunately, I had that pillar in place. I had this mantra, the best thing I ever was wrong. And you can bet I was repeating that mantra when 2020 rolled around and I gritted my teeth and I started to dismantle truth from fiction in the political theater. Now I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of what that looked like for me. But before I do that, I have to tell you what preceded that experience of me opening my mind. And that was the experience of opening my heart. Let me take you back to late 2016. So this is before Trump's inauguration, but while things in the political world were certainly very heated. And at this point in my life, I whistle-blew a systemic sexual abuse scheme at the nutrition school I attended. And I share this story in detail in my book, The Scorpion and the Lion. It's part whistleblower expose and part spiritual memoir. But to give you the briefest summary here, I discovered that I was one in a very long series of young students who had been groomed and abused by a teacher at this nutrition school. Now, this teacher was also my healthcare practitioner. I was his client, and then I learned in his healthcare practice, he had a similar, very long history of grooming and sexually abusing his young clients. So I started to dig deeper, and I realized that this abuse cover-up led all the way to the founder of the nutrition school, who was a predator himself. Now, at this point in my life, I put everything on the line to expose the truth and to whistleblow my experience and to bring together the victims of this abuse so that we could have a voice that would be heard. It was a very formative experience in my life. I did put my life on the line. I put, secondary to that, my reputation and my finances and my business on the line. I, in this process, really wanted to understand how it was that psychopathic predators could reach the top of a community. Like, how did these two evil men become so influential and so respected in this community? And from a psychological perspective, it was just really important that I understand how this worked, because I was seeing it in my small community, and then I was looking out in the political world at large, and I was seeing Trump rise to this unfathomable level of power and seeing the parallels between the abusers in my community and Trump. And it was just astounding to me. It was a very enlightening as well, as I started to realize, these individuals really understand human psychology, and predators can reach high positions of power because they are so adept at understanding and manipulating the fear and trauma in the masses of people. And I realized, the only way we're ever going to break this cycle is to heal on a massive level, heal the trauma and the fear within ourselves that make us so vulnerable to that kind of manipulation. But as you can imagine, this experience was so up close and personal to me, and then I was seeing it mirrored on a national level. I had invested so much into revealing the truth and understanding this dynamic, and my heart was in so much pain. That was another piece of it. Just excruciating emotional pain that I was going through. And because of that pain and how close this topic was to my heart, I was not willing to hear why people voted for Trump. I thought to myself, like, how could anybody vote for Trump? But it wasn't really a question because I wasn't willing to hear the answer. I was in too much pain to do that. But then I entered a chapter where my heart started to open and that pain started to dissolve, and then my mind could open. What that chapter looked like for me was, by divine instructions, I very suddenly moved to Phoenix, Arizona from Washington State. This was in 2019. This was after my whistleblowing had wrapped up, and of course after Trump's inauguration. And I entered this chapter, it was about a year of just sweetness and fun. I believe that God and my soul called me there, and I just went into my healing, which at that point in my life looked like fun and sunshine. And I met a sweet boyfriend. We had about a year together, and he just brought so much joy into my life. So I was in such a place of delight, and I just felt like I was fully living my life, that my attention was taken away from the political theater. And this was such a healthy thing to happen. I was opening my heart, I was healing, and just not giving my energy and attention to politics because I had other wonderful places to divert it to. So that was a really important piece that I look back on, and I realized that preceded me being willing to open my mind to see what was happening in the political arena. And then 2020 rolls around, and a few months into 2020, the world shuts down, and I feel as suddenly compelled to move back to the Seattle area as I had initially felt to move to Phoenix. Like, it was so clear that that chapter was over. And I moved back, not to Seattle, but to a nearby city that was similarly very entrenched in the mandates. Fun times, remember that, right? And so I found myself frontlining the resistance against the pandemic mandates in the city that I was living in, but also online. I spoke at Seattle's largest freedom rally, wrote a book on the COVID shot, published truth-telling videos that, so ironically, my publishers at the time, my book publisher, tried to cancel me for. It was a wild ride, right? And the interesting thing, while all this was happening, I was sharing this information, and I found myself being labeled a right-wing extremist. But I still considered myself a Democrat. I was so confused. I was like, wait, where are they getting this term? Like, what? I still had this Democrat liberal identity. I thought that those were my people. That was my community. And it was, I felt like I hadn't changed my views, but just that the Democrat Party had started to move away from the values that had first drawn me to it. For example, my body, my choice. I was like, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to have autonomy about our bodies? And now government and big pharma are coming together to force us and coerce us to get injections. And I was just holding on to the views I always had, which was government and big pharma don't mix, and we don't need chemical injections to be healthy. So that was one strike against my Democrat identity, but I kind of let it slide. I thought, oh, that's just an anomaly. But then I had another strike against my political identity that this started to lead me to question that identity more and more. So this was around gender identity ideology, which was also coming to a head in 2020. Now, I found myself on the conservative side of this framework. Well, I actually think that this topic is bigger than political divisions, which could be said for any topic, but I found more conservative individuals sharing the view that I held, which was that, of course, womanhood is not a feeling, it is a biological reality. And when it came to gender identity ideology, I was recognizing this grooming towards transhumanism. I felt that there was something deeply wrong with a philosophy that suggests something can be so wrong with a person's body that it requires surgical mutilation and chemical castration for a person to be their true self. I just recognize that as, well, that's pharmaceutical warfare. And I've recognized that when it comes to health in the medical industry. Now I was seeing it victimize traumatized individuals and try to wage pharmaceutical warfare on them. So that was two strikes against my Democrat identity, right? And isn't it an interesting thing? We start to identify and find a sense of community and safety with people who share our beliefs, but then it can be a little rocky territory when we're like, oh, I'm not fitting in anymore. Now, at this time, I did think, well, at least I fit in when it comes to critical race theory. When it comes to the racist stuff, I'm fitting in with the Democrat Party. Because if you remember, also in summer of 2020, the race riots broke out across the country and things got really heated with Black Lives Matter. So I started to binge books on critical race theory. Books like White Fragility, So You Want to Talk About Race, How to Be an Anti-Racist. You know what? I actually might have started to dive into critical race theory before the summer of 2020, because I remember being pretty enmeshed in that philosophy. I went on an emotional roller coaster reading these books and researching critical race theory. And that looked like, for me, feeling guilt at being white, like it was like committing an original sin. Oh, whoops, wrong skin color. I'm the oppressor because of how I was born. I felt embarrassment at my unconsciously racist actions, which were outlined in these books. I felt a heartbreak for the Black individuals who would face such an unfair world. I felt righteous anger for the racist system that these books described. And lastly, I felt a sense of superiority. Now, this is the same flavor of arrogance and superiority that I got hooked into from my childhood religion. That's a really interesting parallel there. I believed that I was, quote, doing the work when it came to like deprogramming racism. And so in this system, this philosophy that made me an oppressor because of my skin color, it offered me a way to like repent of that original sin by confessing a certain ideology and paying penance in certain ways. And, that looks like donating to Black causes or intentionally supporting Black businesses. And so I had this thought, well, some white people are part of this like unconscious, narcissistic white collective, but at least I'm one of the good ones, right? There's so much to unpack here. And one thing that I think of is the other day I saw a man, an old white man, wearing a shirt that said, "I'm fighting for those who don't have your privilege." And it showed that I think it's the Marxist fist sign. And I just laughed to myself because I was like, you might as well wear a shirt that says, like me, or I'm better than you. And that's what I was looking for in this framework that made me an oppressor and like born bad is okay, that just created such a sense of inferiority. How do I save myself by finding a sense of superiority to balance that out? And the sense of superiority is, well, at least I'm doing the work. At least I'm better than the people who are, not doing the work. And I just saw that mirrored where I used to be with this man wearing this t-shirt. And also the irony here, what I've realized now, is that people who really are doing the self-growth, which looks like slaughtering your ego and your identity day after day, like it's messy, it's uncomfortable, and it doesn't look good on a t-shirt or on social media. So there's not much you get to say about it. You just do it. Maybe you talk about it afterwards when you have peace and distance. But in the midst of it, like it is to a degree true that the more you're talking about doing it, the less you're actually doing it. Talking about it makes you feel good and look good. But it's not the same as actually doing the true work. Well, I didn't know that at the time. So now we're at the point in 2020 where the Black Lives Matter protests are erupting and things are really heated when it comes to racial tensions and critical race theory being a conversation in the world. At this point, I had a conversation with a family member who I knew was more on the pretty conservative side of politics. And she listened to me as I spewed my regurgitated talking points about racism. Basically, I was like, I've done all this work to educate myself. I need to give her this information. And I was just on a diatribe. And afterwards, she said, well, I really do want to do the best thing. And I really try hard to see all different sides of a matter. And I thought to myself, well, there's only one right side here. And then she explained that she had read the Black Lives Matter manifesto and disagreed with it because it had a lot of Marxist principles. And she explained that Marxism, when put into practice through communist countries, it just disempowered and left impoverished those communities. Now, I at this point in the conversation, I remember feeling viscerally uncomfortable. Like, you know how feelings of anger and defensiveness can create this tension in your body? I was certainly feeling that. I mean, what a sign that I had so integrated my opinions with my sense of identity that when somebody was disagreeing with those opinions, I felt it in my body. And maybe that's happening for some of you as you listen to this podcast. Maybe things that I am going to say later on in this episode, you might feel emotional, physical discomfort in your body. And that's where you know that you have integrated your opinions as your identity. Your ego has integrated that into your physiology. And I mean, what great information. That's an area where you can find freedom. So I was noticing these uncomfortable emotions arise in this conversation with my family member. And I was also embarrassed. I was too embarrassed to tell her that I didn't really know what Marxism was. I hadn't really done research into how communism had played out in different countries. And at this point in the conversation, she tells me, Lauren, it seems like you kind of have an arrogance around all this, like you have the right education, or you read the right books, and I didn't do the right research. I didn't read the right things or go to the right sources. And I remember I huffed. I was like, well, that's exactly what I think. And oh my God, guys, it was so embarrassing. As soon as those words left my mouth, I thought, oh, bummer. Like, I recognized the arrogance that was in me, and I knew I had to walk right straight into that arrogance and just look at it for what it was, where it came from, why am I holding on to this? And that's what I did the following week. So I'm going to tell you how I started to dismantle, dig deeper under all that. It was really the first time I started to ask, how could anyone in their right mind vote for Trump? And I was actually willing to hear their response. Because like I said, I had said that a lot. How can anybody vote for Trump? But I wasn't willing to listen to them. I was clenching my pain so tightly, I wasn't psychologically or emotionally able to put myself in another person's shoes, which is a really important part of this political healing journey. So I went to YouTube and I started watching videos from conservative commentators, specifically individuals who I thought were, how do I say this? Who were demonized by the conservative party. Like I thought, oh, if you're gay, if you're black, if you're transgender, if you're Asian, Middle Eastern, like you would have to be so stupid to vote for Trump because he's so obviously against your well-being. That, I'm telling you, the thought process that I had in my head. Okay, so I was like, well, then I need to listen to those people to hear how could they vote for Trump. And I just watched hours of different commentators on YouTube, different people from different walks of life explaining their political beliefs. And notably, I came across a video by a man named Brandon Straka. He is an ex-Democrat gay man, and he founded the #WalkAway movement. And Brandon shares how he realized the liberal media had purposely distorted Trump's speeches. He shares like his awakening moment where Brandon had believed Trump made fun of a disabled man at a rally. But then Brandon watched additional video footage and past clips of Trump's mannerisms, and Brandon realized that the mainstream media had intentionally misrepresented Trump's speech and kind of painted a false picture. So from there, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if that's happened elsewhere. So then I set out to read the full transcripts of some of Trump's notorious speeches. I was curious if this had happened elsewhere, where the liberal media distorted or misrepresented what Trump was saying through clips and sound bites. And, for one example, there was that speech where he didn't supposedly decry white supremacy in North Carolina. But when I read the original transcript, he did. It had just been cut out of what CNN was sharing online. And I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh. It was stunning to me. The blatant lie. And I started to realize, oh my goodness, what an energy harvesting scheme this is to inflame people's emotions so much by so blatantly distorting what a person says. And then through, I think this was the YouTube algorithm after the conservative commentators I was watching, I came across the Black economist and philosopher Thomas Sowell, and he is 90 plus years old and scathingly rational. I think I watched about 4 or 5 hours of his interviews and videos straight, and then I remember laying on my bedroom floor with a splitting headache from the cognitive dissonance I was experiencing, because the historical and economic facts that Thomas Sowell articulated were so at odds with the critical race philosophy that I had been immersed in, that it was like just my brain felt like it was unraveling. And that's when I started to look at the critical race theory in a whole new light. I was like, wait a minute. This philosophy totally mirrors the closed-minded religion of my childhood. It talks about being born white as if that's original sin, right? So that creates this sense of deep intrinsic inferiority And what does an inferiority complex need to do? Well, it sends the ego looking for a sense of superiority, which, like I talked about, this system offers. This critical race lens shares steps for repenting and confessing one's sins and converting those who are not yet saved. And it sparked that same flavor of superiority I felt when my ego was all twisted up in religion. So I really came away from that thinking this critical race theory is essentially an atheistic religion. Same dogma, same flavor. So that opened these doors of permission for me to watch conservative media or conservative commentators online. And very, very shortly after, I was like, oh my goodness, this really is just two wings of the same bird. Because the same fear mongering, the same manipulation, the same rhetoric that was happening on the left was happening on the right. It really was like this game of how to convince people that you are not safe at your most fundamental level if other people think differently than you. I mean, talk about disempowering. But for some reason, that really gets into people's lizard brains, this us versus them. And maybe it's because people are so programmed with religion too, that it's like, oh, the only way for you to be a good person, for you to be morally superior, is for you to go out and convert other people by hitting them on the heads with Bibles or political pamphlets to make them think the way you think. But it's so ironic because it's the way you think really working for you, because you seem pretty disempowered, you seem pretty unhappy. It's like, really, it's just such a disempowering perspective. And just this is a pattern that I see right now. You know, people who were Democrat, they call it, quote, getting red pilled, and they swing over to the conservative side of things. Or even people conservative swinging over to the Democrat side of things. Especially we're seeing that with people who are deprogramming from religion. We'll often see that switch, and they were totally brainwashed into one side of the political spectrum. They get out of the religious programming and they'll swing over to being a liberal. Okay, this is actually a good thing for people to personally see, taste, hear, experience, feel both sides of the coin, to realize it's the same coin. That is a very valuable personal experience. But I tell you, if you think that you have made it, that you have completed the political awakening because you have swung from one side of the spectrum to the other, I have to break it to you, journey's not over. You're just gathering the evidence, the personal experience that you need to recognize it is two wings of the same bird, okay? It's really valuable. It's really valuable, but I just offer this reminder. If you've gone from left to right or vice versa and you think you're at the end, you're not. You're just gathering the experience to realize the nature of the beast. I have come to conclude that our greatest form of empowerment is found outside of the political system and not within it. Our greatest form of empowerment is found through the consciousness of love and not the consciousness of fear. It's found through forgiveness and not resentment. It's found through growth and not stagnancy and holding on to old identities. A government mirrors the level of empowerment of the governed. So if we are to see a more ethical and financially healthy government, then it has to come as a reflection of individuals becoming more empowered, more ethical, and financially healthy in their own lives. So I look back at my political journey and I realized that I had fallen into the trap of believing that the government had far more power over my life than it really did. And that belief bred disempowerment in me. And now I've come to the conclusion that no one can ruin my life unless I let them. And that includes the government. Because at the end of the day, I get to choose the state of my heart and my mind. So here's one example. Some people believed that the Biden administration forced them to get a COVID shot. And so people had this story that the government was ruining their life. It's not true. It's not true. I and so many other people chose to experience the consequence of saying no. Unless somebody was holding a gun to your head, like, you're not really forced. Even if you're like, well, I'm going to lose everything unless I get the shot, you're still not forced. You have choices. And for every person who said, I have to get the shot, there were people in more challenging circumstances who said, I will not sacrifice my deepest values. I will be the master of my fate, no matter the circumstances I face as a result of my choices. And, as somebody who was in the latter category, I can tell you, like, it was so rewarding to have come through the other side of that and realized that the power that I had in that experience. And here's another example. I used to believe the rhetoric that the government could, quote, take away women's reproductive rights. Okay, now I laugh. That's so ridiculous. What has happened is we have been propagandized out of the knowledge of how our bodies work and the level of empowerment we have over our bodies. I really love Kim Anami's perspective on this topic. She tells it like it is on some of her podcasts and her Instagram videos. Kim Anami is a sex and relationship coach, particularly teaching tantric and Taoist sexual healing techniques and sexual awakening. And I remember one Instagram live she did where she was like, all of these women are just whining about how these old men in government are taking away their rights. And they're like, oh, old men in the government, you have to give us permission to use our bodies. And Kim is just like, no, like nobody needs to give you permission how to use your body. So there is such profound, ancient, and empowering knowledge that women used to have collectively about how to have total conscious control over our conception, fertility, and pregnancy release. And it is this knowledge that has been taken from us that has led us to believe the government can somehow take away our reproductive rights. But if we reclaim that knowledge, the government has no power there. If you're interested in that, I have done a whole podcast episode on reproductive sovereignty beyond big pharma and the government. Just like I believe that the government can't ruin my life unless I let it, I've come to the conclusion that no one, including the government, can make my life better unless I make my life better. Consider how people think that their finances or their health is going to improve if a certain person gets in office. I think that's a total illusion and a distraction from how can we make our health and finances better, no matter the circumstances, no matter who's in office. That really is the ultimate empowerment. It really is this distracting fantasy that people get swept up in of, oh, my life can't improve or won't improve unless a certain person gets into power. Like, what BS? Even when we're in very challenging collective economic times, I remember the mantra that a financial planner had hammered into my brain, and she told me over and over, millionaires are made in recessions. Millionaires are made in recessions. And you know what? She became a millionaire in 2020, like right when the economy crashed, because she was so prepared. She had studied financial history, and she knew that the times of greatest economic crisis are the times of greatest economic opportunity for those who had a good head on their shoulders. Like, if you don't get fearful, if you get wise, then you can turn circumstances that look unfortunate into the greatest opportunity. And finances is just one example of that. So if you find yourself in a place where you're falling into this thinking that you need certain people in political power for your life to be better, I offer this definition of radical responsibility. For me, radical responsibility means 3 things. First, no one can ruin my life but me. Second, my ability to heal is absolutely limitless. And 3, the state of my life is not dependent on the state of the world, but rather it's dependent on the state of my heart and the state of my mind. In conclusion, I once found myself in a world divided into us versus them, oppressor versus oppressed, and Republican versus Democrat, good versus bad. And I looked around that world and realized I had taken a very wrong turn. It wasn't any of them, any of the outsiders or the bad people who were ruining my life. It was me. I had become so angry and bitter and hateful that I was standing in the way of my future dreams. I was standing in the way of opening my heart and my mind. So I turned down the volume on the news. I turned it off completely, and I turned up the volume on my heart. The more I opened my heart, the more beautiful the world became, and the less it mattered how anyone voted. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Truth Activist Podcast. Please rate, like, and subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.